Today we're looking at cancelled Nintendo Switch games. I've got a bit of a bad throat right now, so my wife is helping me out with the voiceover today. Show her some support in the comments and like the video. She's never done this before, it is harder than it looks, and also stick around to the end of the video for some great outtakes.
Have you ever experienced that exciting build-up for a newly announced Nintendo Switch game only to have it cancelled out of the blue? If you're anything like me, it's happened more than once. Let's dive into the world of scrapped Nintendo Switch games. Some would release on other systems, while others never saw the light of day. Let's look at why they got the chop, and decide whether they would have been worth our time and cash. Subscribe if you enjoy the video. First on our radar is Ballistic NG. A love letter to the anti-gravity racing genre, this game brings to mind classics like Wipeout and F-Zero. Players are thrust directly into high-speed races, battling against other pilots on intricately designed futuristic tracks. Ballistic NG is available on Steam, and player feedback has been incredible with a rating of overwhelmingly positive. Many call out its nostalgic vibes, advanced customization, and multiplayer as highlights. Honestly, it's easy to be impressed by the trailer, which makes the cancellation all the more disappointing. The cancellation of Ballistic NG came as a result of recent changes in Unity's policies. This was the introduction of additional per-install fees, which the developers weren't willing to take on. While Unity did backtrack after what became a PR nightmare for them, the team stated that there was no trust or security for them, so the cancellation would stand. They hope to release another game in the future on the system, but this time built on a different architecture. I would have loved to have played this one, but I'll be picking it up on Steam now instead. Deliver Us the Moon is an indie adventure, and I was honestly disappointed when news broke about the Switch version's cancellation. Why? Because I played it on PlayStation, really enjoyed it, and wanted to see it reach a wider audience. In the game, we're launched into a dystopian sci-fi tale where Earth is running out of resources. As a last-ditch effort, global leaders established the World Space Agency. Its task? Extract a new energy source from the moon. All seems well as we mine the lunar surface until a deafening silence, where we suddenly lose all contact with the team. Years later, you're Earth's last astronaut, set with the task to find out what went wrong and hopefully save humanity. Publisher Wired Productions announced they had discontinued development. The reason? A number of undisclosed factors and industry-wide stresses that had been felt by the pandemic. I would suggest checking this out on another system if you like a narrative-centric adventure. It even received a sequel recently, Deliver Us Mars. Next, Lord of the Rings Gollum, which I think, safe to say, wasn't a loss for us Nintendo Switch owners. Considered by many to be one of the worst games of 2023, I saw this cancellation coming immediately when the backlash began around the experience. This is an action-adventure game with stealth elements where you take on the role of Gollum. It's set between the events of The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring. Pretty obvious concept, but we're on a quest to retrieve our precious. I've still yet to play it, but there is a curiosity there, so I'll give it a go once I see it sub $10. This not only resulted in Daedalic Entertainment shutting down in-house development, but also led to the cancellation of another Lord of the Rings game they had in the pipeline. Many may not think it's a big loss, but this was a very talented team that released some great games, especially in the adventure point-and-click genre. They'll continue to publish titles, but news of job losses is disheartening. It seems likely that they took on more than they could handle, diving into a genre outside their expertise on a large budget, and with a massive franchise like Lord of the Rings. Sadly, they weren't given the opportunity to grow from this experience. Steep was announced at the beginning of the Nintendo Switch era. In fact, in the original console trailers, you may remember simulated shots of people playing this game on the system. However, Steep was cancelled relatively soon after. The reason? Well, this is where it gets interesting. The developers decided to focus on their existing players, opting to expand the live content and challenges instead. Consequently, they ceased production on the Nintendo Switch version. In my opinion, welcoming an additional sizable player base would have been to the game's advantage, so it feels like a strange excuse. Possibly the game was too demanding. It is, after all, an expansive, extreme sports open world requiring a flawless frame rate. The essence of Steep lay in its open-ended gameplay centered around skiing, wingsuit flying, snowboarding, and paragliding. Experimentation was prioritized. Find a line, exploit it, see what incredible feats you can accomplish. My time with it was on PlayStation, where I also snagged the Olympics DLC, and granted, it didn't grip me for hours on end, but it was fun to dive into occasionally. Personally, I'm convinced this game could have thrived on Nintendo Switch. After all, very few games on the system tackle this genre. When 2021 rolled in, it brought the news of Konami's decision to shelve the much-anticipated reboot, Hypersports R. Now, I can't deny that the launch trailer had initially left me underwhelmed. Something about the visual design just felt off. Yet, as someone who held a fond spot for both Hypersports and track and field, the news of its cancellation did sting. The grounds for the cancellation? We didn't get much other than various circumstances. It seems unusual for Konami to stumble over what seems to be a straightforward concept. Fortunately, there are alternatives. Want old school? Check out the original 84 Hypersports build available on the eShop, an Arcade Archives release. Want something more modern? Check out Tokyo Olympics or Mario and Sonic at the Olympics. I think there are much bigger losses on today's list, but I still would have checked this out. Evil Dead the game was an experience that I wanted to love. In fact, I picked it up on launch day on PlayStation, hoping that it would do justice to its cult classic roots. The concept? An asymmetrical online multiplayer experience of survivors versus a killer or a deity. Sadly, it fell flat. It was overcomplicated, matches ran too long, and it couldn't stand up to the king of the genre, Dead by Daylight. About a year after its launch, the developers dropped a bombshell. They were halting the production of new content and updates. This also accompanied the news that the Nintendo Switch build was being canceled. Servers have remained open, but I think this might have been a blessing. The game had its fair share of balance problems, and its player base numbers were low. A glance at its peak player count over the last 6 months, 586 on Steam versus 68,000 for Dead by Daylight and 17,000 for the recent Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I think summarizes it perfectly. This would have probably been a case of sitting in empty lobbies more often than not. The most disappointing for me on today's list, Marvel's Midnight Suns cancellation. I love the PlayStation 5 build of this game, and I sunk a huge amount of hours into its original storyline and unique rendering of the Marvel universe. This creation from the minds behind XCOM invites us into the boots of a demon-hunting character shrouded in mystery. It's a card-based tactical RPG that assembles an esteemed cast of Marvel heroes to thwart the demonic schemes of the Mother of Demons. I was hyped for this from the get-go. I pre-ordered it, and I would have happily picked it up on Switch as well to have it on the go. Sadly, it wasn't meant to be. The why of the cancellation remains unknown. Originally, this game saw its release on PS5, Series X, and Steam, with PS4 and Xbox One versions following later. However, when these were on the cusp of release, we were hit by the news, the cancellation of the Switch build. No direct explanation was offered apart from the fact that it was no longer in active development. My guess, not only is this game demanding, but I suspect it's because the game fell short of financial expectations. I wish we had got this one. It was on my list of favorite games in 2022. The cancellation of RoboCop on the Nintendo Switch really sucked. Initially slated for release on all major platforms, developers pivoted, leaving us only with a quiet announcement on their website stating that there are currently no plans for a Switch version. As much as it hurts to admit it, I understand their reasoning. We're closing in on the end of the Switch's lifecycle, and I suspect this game is simply too demanding for the hardware without extensive compromises and work. Remember, it's a relatively small development team behind the scenes. Still, a small part of me hopes that RoboCop could find its way to a Nintendo console soon. It's possible that the title could be flagged for the upcoming Switch successor. From a practical standpoint, this could make sense, considering the predicted hardware improvements and the boost in game performance. Having played RoboCop on Steam, the game captures the essence of RoboCop perfectly. The gameplay is unusually slow and clunky, typically the last thing you want in a first-person shooter, but it seems fitting for the game and it lends it a unique charm. Complementing the action is a narrative focus and detective elements. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and I hope my hunch turns out to be correct. RoboCop ranks amongst developer Teon's standout offerings, holding its own alongside gems like Terminator Resistance, A game that, although initially brushed off by critics, eventually found its way into the hearts of fans, mine included. And that's just a small sample of games that have been announced for and subsequently cancelled on the Nintendo Switch. Let me know any others for you that come to mind. Which of these games as well would you most likely have picked up and added to the library? Let us know in the comments. As always, like, subscribe, and join us again for reviews, deals, news, and lists daily. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to SwitchCorner. I'm Alex, here with all your daily news. Have you ever experienced that exciting build-up for a newly announced Nintendo Switch game?
Stop.
I sound like Keira Knightley.
Yeah, do it properly.
Sitting in empty lobbies more often than not. What's sitting in empty lobbies? Whose lobby?
Like a waiting room to start the game.
Oh. Ever experienced that exciting build-up for a newly announced...
Start.
Cut!
Great start. Only about another 2,000 words to go.
I've still yet to play. Shut up! They just took on more than they could chew. Diving into genre. What? That's what I would say.
Took on more than they can chew.
Okay.
Bit off more than they can chew.
Bit off. Okay.
You can't say took off. They either took on more than they can handle, or they bit off more than they can chew. You can't combine those two sentences, like sayings.